All right, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Ekta Marcoullier, Executive Director of the Pikes Peak Small Business Development Center. Thank you for joining us today for a payroll protection program update by our lead consultant on our COVID relief program when it comes to taxes and everything PPP especially, Brad Whitten with the Pikes Peak Financial Group. We know that you're here today to learn about the latest in the PPP program. We know that things have been changing quite a bit, and we want to give you that update. As a quick reminder, the Small Business Development Center is here for you to answer all your questions. And after this program, you will get a link to the recording. And you should, in the attachment section, handouts, if you look at that on the right side, there's a few handouts there to help you with the forgiveness piece. The SBDC provides free consulting, practical training, and business resources for El Paso and Teller County. We're one of 15 offices statewide. So if you are joining us from elsewhere outside of the Pikes Peak region, please note that every SBDC runs a COVID relief program, and we all have consultants to support you. So you can register for consulting through the coloradosbdc.org website or for Pikes Peak SBDC, pikespeakSBDC.org/consulting. I'd like to thank our partners quickly, our host, El Paso County Economic Development, the Small Business Administration, Park State Bank and Trust, Vector Bank and Credit Union, the City of Colorado Springs, Lumen Technology, and Colorado Springs Utilities. The COVID relief program actually started in 2012 when we assisted businesses through the Waldo Canyon fire through our disaster relief program. We then subsequently assisted our small business community through the Black Forest fire and floods. And now with the COVID relief program, if you go to pikespeaksbdc.org/prepare, you will see the latest and greatest on what you need to know for grant and loan programs to support your business, PPP updates, economic injury disaster loan updates, and more. And I'll put that information in the chat while Brad is presenting. With that said, we have quite a bit of information to present to you, and Brad has a PowerPoint that he is presenting at this point. So Brad, I'm going to hand the baton over to you. Go off camera. I will be monitoring questions in the question box. Please put your questions there so we can see them. And Brad is very good at tracking that question box as well, and will answer those questions throughout the presentation, as we understand questions will come up at different times based on the topic at hand. So thank you so much for joining us today. Brad, thank you as well.
Absolutely. All right. So let's just jump into it. There are a significant amount of updates. A lot of them are minor clarifications, but there are some that are going to affect a lot of people, and probably a lot of you all that are tuned in today. So just start with a real quick background of what the PPP program is. It was part of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, referred to as the CARES Act. That provided some lending in the form of forgivable loans to businesses that were impacted by COVID. I'm not going to really go into that much, just some quick facts that I think help as we go through this, just some things to recall. Under the Payroll Protection Program, the eligible costs are payroll costs, which include all forms of cash compensation, health insurance and retirement benefits, and then some state level taxes that are assessed against employee compensation, such as unemployment tax, rent, mortgage interest, utilities. Those are the categories of costs that are eligible to be used, or PPP dollars can be used on. So let's just jump into the updates here. I'll keep an eye on questions and try to stop as we go through where it makes sense to address any questions that I can answer for you all. So now there's been several updates since March when the CARES Act first passed. It's been sort of a building the plane as you fly it kind of thing. Now most recently there was August 4th and October 7th, some new FAQs, and then a new form that was released October 8th, as well as guidance for small loans under $50,000 that are positive for the most part, I believe. There's a couple things in here that maybe aren't so positive for everybody, but for the most part, there were some good changes. Now, the FAQs really clarified some unanswered questions around which form to use for various people that fall into the sole proprietor, individual contractors, or self-employed individuals. When borrowers are required to begin making payments, which was stretched out to 10 months from the completion of your covered period, really due to how difficult this has become, and many banks still are not processing forgiveness applications for some people. If you're under 150,000 and the PPP loan money that you received, many banks are still not processing those. So because of that and the pending legislation and the rule changes that have continued to come so frequently, that's really led to okay, we're going to stretch out the period of time here before it converts to a loan so that everybody has plenty of time. And as a practice, we've been kind of preaching patience a little bit with the forgiveness applications to let some of these questions be answered, and potentially even let the election pass here, and maybe we get another bill that provides some automatic forgiveness for some loans, maybe not, but I think the thing here is patience, and there's plenty of time. Now, there was also some clarifications on questions around what counts as payroll costs, and as well as around owners of S-corps and what payroll costs is for them. There's also some clarification on non-payroll costs and what are eligible, really clarifying the word incurred. If you've tuned into my previous webinars on this topic, I ragged on the word incurred a little bit and how we figure out what that means. Well, that's been clarified. And then some loan forgiveness questions and the new forms as well. So there's been several things that we're going to go through kind of piece by piece here. All right, so first, updates on payroll costs. Now, I didn't go into it here, but I think we should address what the covered period and the alternative covered period are real quick, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Now, the covered period starts on the day you receive the loan, the day the money hits your account. The alternative covered period for payroll costs is if you're on a biweekly or more frequent payroll schedule, you can start your payroll covered period on the first day of your next payroll, so that it aligns with your pay dates, and that's what's called the alternative covered period. So you'll hear, I'll refer to those terms frequently throughout the presentation, and so it's helpful to kind of know what we're talking about there. Now, what counts here is, or the clarification that was issued here is that payroll costs incurred during the covered period, either the alternative or the regular covered period, but paid after the covered period, are counted as long as those costs are paid by the next regular pay date. So in other words, if your covered period ends on Friday and your next payroll isn't until next Tuesday, you can still count the amount of payroll that was incurred during your window, even though it's not paid until after. So that helps rope in and clarifies which costs we can pull in. In addition to that, payroll that was incurred before you got the loan, so before the start of your covered period, but paid during the covered period, that's also eligible. So you kind of get the best of both worlds on both sides of the covered period. You can include, your payroll that was paid in your covered period, even though the wages were earned before it. So that's positive. I mean, that's going to help squeeze out some more costs, I think, on both sides of the covered window to meet your obligation and the criteria of how it has to be spent. So that was clarified in the FAQ and the new guidance that's been issued over the last couple of months. Now, another issue that has come up frequently is what about bonuses and tips and all the other types of cash compensation that wasn't clearly defined in wages or payroll costs. Well, payroll costs includes basically all forms of cash compensation, whether it's tips or commissions or bonuses or hazard pay or severance pay or whatever the pay is in the form of cash, but you are limited to that 100K annually. So, as we had discussed in previous presentations, bonuses can kind of skew that a little bit. It does count towards the payroll costs, but depending on the amount, you may end up with some payroll limited, possibly, because you have to annualize the payroll and everybody's subject to that individually. Each individual employee is subject to that $100,000 cap. Now, probably I don't know if it's concerning or, just an issue to be aware of if you're an S corporation. Therefore, you're an owner and you're an employee of your own S corp. The cash compensation that is eligible for an S corp owner of more than 2% is 2/5 or 2.5, 2.5 months, 2/5. I don't know what I'm talking about. It's Friday. 2.5 months of their 2019 employee compensation. So not distributions, not draws, just what was on your W-2 for 2019, limited to that $100,000. So in other words, the max amount, to put it in real dollars, for S corp owners is $20,833. It's the maximum amount that can be counted as cash compensation. Now, here's the thing that we have to be careful of, and I have a few clients that this did impact. That limit is per individual across all businesses in which you own. So if you own 3 restaurants and you receive the PPP loan at all 3 of your restaurants, that $20,833 or that 100K limit is your limit in total, not in each restaurant. So in other words, you can't triple it in my example, and that was in the FAQs, and going to be something that's interesting to see how it impacts businesses. I don't know that it's going to be too impactful, just simply because not many, in my analogy, restaurant owners are drawing a $100,000 salary from each business. So if you had a $40,000 salary from 3 different restaurants, you're still limited to that $100,000 cap, so you'd only lose 20K of wages. So it will be impactful. It is something to coordinate if you have multiple businesses and make sure you're aware of. But hopefully it's not too impactful on most of us. In addition, for S corp owners, you can count state level taxes, so unemployment or occupation and privilege taxes that are assessed against wages, those kind of things, on the owner's compensation, and employer retirement contributions. However, the cap is 2.5 months of the 2019 retirement contribution. So if you didn't contribute in 2019, you got a bit of an issue, that you can't now then contribute and pay for that out of the PPP loan, since your limit is based on the 2019 amount. Now, health insurance premiums for an S corp owner are not eligible for additional forgiveness. I think I alluded to this on the first couple of webinars that this was a concern, because health insurance premiums for an S corp owner are counted as wages. And so that's exactly what the SBA came out and said, is it's not that your health insurance premium, if you're an S corp owner and the company pays it, it's not that you can't use it, it's just subject to this $100,000 cash compensation. It's not an additional cost like it is for non-owner employees that you can add to their compensation. It's roped into that 100K limit. So that is kind of the way we thought it was going to go, but you know, it does limit the costs that are eligible for S corp owners a little bit. And a lot of us are probably S corps. It's one of the largest entity types and fastest growing because of the tax savings that can be realized there. So that's going to impact a lot of the PPP loans out there. Now we're going to move into non-payroll costs a little bit here and talk about some of these other type of costs. Now that would be back to the refresher in the beginning. The non-payroll costs are rent, mortgage interest, utilities. Those are the non-payroll costs that are eligible. Now the one thing that came up that I don't think I noted in the slides, and I might be wrong, we may see it in a minute, but I'm going to talk about it now, is that the SBA did clarify that if you refinance, so if you had a mortgage in place and then you refinanced, you know, March 1st, let's say, the criteria was the mortgage had to be in place as of February 15th. So there was some question there of, well, it really was, I just refied it after February 15th. Does that still count? And it does. That was, you know, clarified that as long as it was just a, you know, refi or whatever of an existing obligation prior to that date of February 15th, that would count. So now the same rule that we just talked about for payroll costs of being able to pull in payroll costs on the back end for things that are incurred but not paid until after your covered period, that applies to non-payroll costs as well. So in other words, if your rent, you know, your covered period ends on the 28th of the month, you can accrue the utilities that you didn't pay until the 3rd of the following month for that partial period, you know, that fell into the covered period. So you can pull some back into your covered period and count those costs. And then the big question that came up a lot is, what if I was behind on rent? You know, what if I couldn't make last month's rent payment? Now I got the PPP loan and I can pay my back rent. They did clarify that that was eligible as well. So in other words, if you received, you know, if an expense was incurred before you got the loan or your covered period starts, which is the date the loan is deposited, and then you use that money to pay those obligations, you can count that cost. So that's a good thing. I think all the way around it helps, again, pull costs in on the front end and rope costs back end on the back end. So we're able to maximize the costs that are eligible there a little bit. Now, it's another thing to point out that was clarified is the alternative covered period. Again, just a refresher, that's where you can slide your start date forward for payroll costs to your next payroll. So instead of the date you got the loan, you can slide it forward to the first day of the next pay period. That does not apply to non-payroll costs. That only applies to payroll costs. So if you elect to use that, then you're going to have two different periods essentially that you have to track costs for. It's a little bit of a you know, tricky thing to be aware of. I don't think it's that difficult, but just making sure you're aware of that when you're computing costs and making sure you spent the funds appropriately. You could potentially have two different covered periods, your alternative covered period for payroll costs and your normal covered period for non-payroll costs. Now, there was some not necessarily good. I mean, I think that I was cautioning previously Well, let me back up a step and explain what I'm talking about before I go there. You know, a while back, I think it was in June, when the SBA issued some relief for being unable to hire or rehire people, which we saw come up as a result of many things, but unemployment being so high and people turning down work and not wanting to come back, that kind of thing. You know, the SBA did provide some relief there to say, hey, if you made a good faith effort to rehire an employee and they turned it down, that you can exclude that from your FTE count reduction, so you wouldn't be penalized for that. And you know, from the moment that came out, my hesitation was, how do you document that? How do you show good faith? What's the rules? Well, I think that fear, that hesitation has sort of been realized here. And what they did is kind of say, what the SBA did is, here's how you document that. And we'll go over it here. So a borrower may exclude any reduction in full-time equivalent employees if the borrower is able to document in good faith an inability to rehire individuals who were employees on 2/15 of 2020, and an inability to hire similarly qualified, tricky word, individuals for those unfilled positions on or before the end of the year, which is that safe harbor date of, if you rehire everybody by 12/31, you're good. So not only do you have to show a good faith effort to rehire the person that was let go, if they decline, you also have to show a good faith effort to hire a similarly qualified individual. I'm going to practice that word later. So in addition, you're required to inform the unemployment office of any rejected rehire offers within 30 days of the rejection. So you try to rehire somebody, you can document it with a written offer, you get a written record of the rejection. Now you have to be able to show that you reported them or informed, is the correct word, that you informed the unemployment office of that rejected rehire offer within 30 days of the rejection. Problem with that is, I get why, you know, I think we all understand the purpose of that, is to not encourage people to turn down work and stay on unemployment, and if they're doing so, then they're not eligible for unemployment. I think we get the intent, but the lateness of issuing that guidance, you could be in a position where the rejection was in May, and now we're in August before we get that clarification. It's well past 30 days. So, you know, I think there's going to be a little bit of an issue potentially relying on this exclusion, you know, of people that didn't want to come back, or if you had a decrease in your FTEs, of being able to show a good faith effort here and claim that exclusion. I think we're better off, if this applies to you, of trying to meet the safe harbor and rehiring and getting our FTE count back up by the end of the year. That's going to be the safer bet, or the easier bet. I don't know if any of those words are the right word. You know, maybe a little easier to document and show, but it's hard to hire right now. So. Okay, so let's see. I don't see any questions just yet, so we'll keep plugging through here. Now, the next thing that happened, and this was on October 7th or 8th, October 8th, it's on the slide. The SBA the Treasury released new guidance for small loans. Now, if you attended the previous classes on the PPP loans or not, the background here is that there is a pending bill that's been sitting, waiting to be debated by Congress since July. I don't remember the exact date, but in July, that provides automatic forgiveness for all loans under $150,000, basically with a one-form attestation saying I didn't commit fraud or something along those lines. is what the bill calls for. And so a lot of people were hoping that would pass, but with the election year and the gridlock that's resulted, basically nothing is passing right now. Still a possibility it could pass in post-election in mid-November. But the Treasury acted to not quite provide automatic forgiveness for small loans, which they defined under $50,000, not the higher limit that Congress is possibly going to debate at some point in the future. But not the 150, but the 50. And so along with that, there's now a third version of the loan forgiveness application. So this one, though, I think is going to apply to a lot of our smaller loans, to a lot of our clients, to a lot of our community members, and probably a lot of people on this webinar that received a loan maybe in the $20 or $30 or $40,000 range. This is going to provide, I think, a lot of simplicity to getting that loan forgiven. Now, as I noted here, it's not quite automatic. You're still required to file this new form. However, it does offer relief in that it you have some exemptions there and forgiveness reduction, and much less stringent reporting requirements. Basically, no calculations really go into this form. And so we'll talk about this a little bit more here. And in the handouts, whoops, what am I doing? There we go. In the handouts here, I don't know if you can see this, but there is all three of the loan applications. The 3508S, which is the simplified application for loans under $50,000. So you can see a copy of it in the handouts. All right, so now who can use this form? Well, borrowers of $50,000 or less, and if you fall into this category, you're exempt from any reductions in forgiveness as a result of reduction in FTEs and a reduction of hourly wages or annual salaries. So in other words, this simplified form doesn't require you to report payroll or non-payroll numbers when applying for forgiveness. It really streamlines and simplifies the process. You're only required on that form to report the following: some demographic information, loan information, how much, when does your covered period, dates, that kind of stuff, and then some representations and certifications, of how, just certifying that you use the program appropriately and that kind of thing. They're all listed out in there. It does also call for, see if I can pull it open here actually. For any idle advance amount. So if you received an idle advance, it does still call for that number in here, as well as the idle application number, and some employee information and whatnot. But it's really just demographic stuff. I mean, this is the loan or the application form for $50,000 or less. Goes through these certifications that you're being honest and you're, not being dishonest, I guess. And then you sign it, and it's supposed to provide the benefits here. Reduced reporting. It should be much quicker and easier to fill out. It doesn't include any of those calculations, as I alluded to, and if you attended the previous webinars, those calculations are burdensome. The full-time equivalent employees and the different covered periods and testing windows you have to apply that to. The wage reduction calculations of, wages can't go down more than 25%, either on an hourly basis or on salary and total comp. You have to do all these complex calculations for which there's calculators and spreadsheets and numerous things to help with. But if you're under 50K, Treasury's basically just said, you don't need to do any of that stuff. And it should have shorter processing time for both the lenders and the SBA to kind of streamline those smaller loans so that the bigger ones can, be scrutinized a little bit easier, and the time can go into looking at those larger loans. But the issue here, in my mind, is we're still in limbo a little bit. If you received a loan and you're in between that 50 to 150 range, 50,000 to 150,000, I don't know. I mean, I still would probably practice a little bit of patience. I'd work on gathering your documents, maybe analyzing what you've spent so that you feel comfortable you're in a good spot and you can move quickly on the application when the bank provides the portal or the application to do so. And but at the same time, I may wait a little bit, maybe another 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe till Thanksgiving or so, to see if there's any movement on that bill to provide automatic forgiveness for loans under 150. Do they circle back and get it on the agenda post-election in that lame duck period, or possible a lame duck for a lot of senators potentially and Congress people. But if they come back and do that, it'd be great for a lot of people, but it keeps us in limbo even longer. I feel like this whole program we've been in limbo in some form or fashion for about the whole thing, but you still are in that 50 to 150 range, in my opinion. If you're under 50,000 with this streamlined application, I don't see why not. If the bank will accept it and process it, and then might as well move forward and try to get your loan forgiven. If you're over 150, the odds of you having automatic forgiveness are slim to none. And you might as well, you're going to have to do most of the, if not all of the calculations. It's going to take a lot of work, and so you may want to get moving on that. But for most of our small businesses, we're going to be under that 150 range. And if we're over 50 and under 150, we still have some, maybe a strategic patience to practice here, to just hope that this gets simplified even more. So, and with the 10 months, which that 10-month period of time to apply for forgiveness starts at the end of your covered period. So in other words, you have 24 weeks or 8 weeks, depending on when you receive the loan. Oops, I apologize. Put that on D&D here. You have 10 months from that date, so you could stretch into mid-year next year before, not that I'm suggesting you wait that long, not by any means. I don't think you want to wait that long. My point is just simply that I don't think another 2 or 3 weeks to see what happens post-election, is going to be detrimental or put anybody in a bad shape. I think it's maybe smart to just be a little patient. The other pending bill, and there's conflicting points of view on this. There's some accountants that, well, let me explain it, then I'll explain the conflicting positions. But the IRS issued a notice back in, I think it was May or June, basically saying that the PPP loan is in fact taxable, even though the CARES Act says it isn't. The IRS said, well, okay, if you receive money that you don't have to pay back and it's not taxable, well, then you can't deduct the expenses that you pay with those funds. So in other words, none of your payroll, none of your rent or mortgage interest, none of that stuff would be your utilities that you use the PPP loan to pay. None of that would be deductible, hereby making it taxable. Now, that's where the disagreement comes in. There's several accountants, me included, that think the IRS would have a hard time doing that. It was clearly in the bill that the congressional intent was for that not to be taxable. But if you received a $40,000 loan, do you want to be the test case to challenge the IRS and take that position? And I don't know. So there's some conflicting views there on what to do with that. And there is a bill, another bill that came up, I believe it was in July as well, it just hasn't been scheduled for a vote or for a debate or anything, but it's still sitting there, is to fix that code section that the IRS is using to apply here and make it not apply. So take out the uncertainty, congressional act to make those things deductible. And it's one of the few things in life right now that both Republicans and Democrats agree on for the most part. So I think it has a great shot of passing. And I'm not super worried about, any surprise taxability issues here, but I do think it's something that should be at least brought up and pointed out that there is a concern, maybe a small concern, but something to be aware of. Now, the other issue is, when does that come into play? I'm deviating from the slides a bit here. I didn't put all of this on the slides, but I do think we should take a minute and talk about it. But what I mean is, from the IRS's perspective, the expense, you don't have an issue until the loan is forgiven. So right now, until you go through the forgiveness process and you get the final word that, hey, your loan is forgiven, until that occurs, you still have a loan, not a tax-free income source. Well, I think the reality is, for a lot of us, those two things are going to happen in different years, when we spent the money and when it actually gets forgiven. For a lot of us, that's going to be, we spent it in 2020 and then it's forgiven in 2021, and now we have a mismatch of the years, and we got to make a decision on how we're going to treat that. So hopefully Congress passes that and puts this issue to bed, and we don't have any concerns about taxability. But yeah, just wanted to kind of point that out for a minute. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go over a summary here of the various application options, of the different forms that there are that you could potentially fill out depending on your specific situation. And they kind of think about a complexity, like number line here. There's a camera, there it is. They almost go from easier to harder as we progress through these here. So the first one is the one we just talked about, which is 3508S, which is the simplified forgiveness application for loans under 50,000, or I should say 50,000 or less. If you're right at 50, you can still use it. And just a quick refresher, we just talked about it, so I'll only spend a minute on it, but it's got reduced reporting information, excludes calculations, and provides a shorter, simplified process for both the borrower, the lender, and the SBA. The next option here is the form 3508EZ, which is the EZ form that came out a little, I want to say it was June, maybe late June, early July, when this form was issued. And it doesn't have a loan size restriction. It's available for a loan of any size as long as you meet one of the following criteria. And there's 3 criteria here. And I bolded the word "and" in each criteria just so it kind of stands out there, like my typo in the first bullet point. But so the borrower is self-employed, an independent contractor, or a sole proprietor. And so one of those 3 things, and you had no employees at the time of application, and you did not include any employee salaries in the computation of average monthly payroll on the application. So in other words, just your self-employment income. You had no employees at the time you applied, and no employees' wages were factored into the loan amount. You're eligible for the EZ form if you meet that criteria. The next one is, you had employees, but you didn't reduce salary, you didn't reduce wages by more than 25% for anybody, and you did not reduce the number of employees or the average paid hours of employees between 1/1/20 and the end of your covered period. So basically, just business as usual, more or less, kept the same employees, you paid the same wages, had the same hours, all that kind of stuff. Everything remained the same, but you had employees. So that if you fit into that, you can use the easy form as well. And then the next one is you did not reduce salary or wages of any employee, and you were unable to operate during the covered period due to compliance. I reduced the wording here. It's a bit wordy if you look at the actual application, but more or less what it's saying is you didn't reduce wages and you were impacted by a shutdown order of some sort, whether state, local, federal, you know, that made you unable to open your business. You can use this easy form. Now, the easy form is a little longer than the new simplified form for loans under 50,000, but it's still easier than the full-blown full application with all the calculations, because some calculations are excluded here. Now, for this form, you do have to do the calculation of payroll costs and non-payroll costs, as well as gather the supporting documentation, wage reports, you know, leases, rent checks, etc. So you do have that, but it excludes the calculation of FTEs and you know, the 25% reduction in pay. You don't have to do that because that's one of the criteria to use this form, is you're certifying that you didn't have those reductions. Therefore, you don't have to do those calculations. So it's easier, but it's, you know, still time consuming. There's still work there. You still have to do some information gathering and some payroll costs and some calculations. So it is, as I noted here, simplified for those who did not reduce FTEs or wages or were restricted by COVID-related issues. Now, the last forgiveness application is the complete form. Now, this is going to apply for all loan sizes, but as I noted here, only borrowers who do not meet eligibility for either the 3508S or the 3508EZ. You know, only if you're not eligible for either of those should you use the full form. If you can fit into either of those other two buckets, you want to go that route to simplify the work that you have to do to get forgiveness here. Now, the 3508 contains all the bells and whistles. You know, you have all the calculations, you have documentation, you have to, you know, like I said, all the bells and whistles, every calculation, every limitation, excuse me, and all the necessary documentation to support those. This is the most time consuming. And I think you're going to find this, the people that need to use this form are typically going to be the larger loans or people that laid off employees and weren't able to, or not willing, or, you know, to get them back until the safe harbor date of 12/31. You know, but my point here that I'm trying to stress is just we want to try to stay away from this form if at all possible. For under 50K, we got a clear path to use the simplified, streamlined, you know, easier form. If we're over 50K, but we didn't have any reductions in wages or we're shut down during our covered period, then we can go the easy form route and still, you know, have an easier time of getting forgiveness. But if none of those apply, we have to go the full route. Now, one thing to point out here is that there are a lot of calculators. You know, I know AICTA and the SBDC had sent out a calculator that the AICPA had put together to help with these calculations. I still think we want to find, if we have to do these calculations, we want to automate it as much as possible. it's hard. I mean, to sit down and go through this by hand with a calculator and a pen, you know, in the paper application, if you have to do the full application, I mean, that's a challenge. I mean, it's not easy. And so I would encourage the use of tools, the use of spreadsheets that can help, you know, fill in some cells and it'll do some of the calculations for you. You know, anything that can automate this process and make it a little bit easier for you, I'm a big fan of. So now, just logically, you know, I get this question a lot. You know, when can I apply? When can I apply? You know, that's probably a weekly, I don't know, batch of 30 or 40 emails from our clients that we get every week or two of, can we apply yet? And, you know, what do I do? And the SBA, I have the SBA form here. But the reality is your lender, the SBA forms that I've included in the handouts, the SBA forms that are available on their website of these applications, they're likely going to be very similar or exactly what your lender, your bank provides you with. But at the end of the day, it's your bank form, it's your bank's portal, or however they're processing these that'll have to be completed and filled out. So, you know, we need the bank or the lender, I keep saying the bank, but there's some non-traditional lenders as well. But, you know, the lender to provide you with the mechanism to apply for forgiveness. And that's been delay after delay after delay. And it's, you know, why, I get asked that a lot, you know, why, what's the problem here? Why are there so many delays? Well, there's been a wave after wave after wave of new guidance, you know, really since March. Every month, every few weeks, there's new guidance, there's some clarifications, there's some tweaks, there's some, you know, adjustments. And each time that happens, lenders have to adjust their process, their application, they have to change their instructions, their process to, you know, facilitate the application being prepared, and then you know, their portals or you know, their the way that they're accepting these, all that has to be updated each time that there is a wave of new guidance. So that's led to delays. And then the other thing that's led to some serious delays is the pending bills. You know, and when in July, it seemed like we were moving towards a bill that was going to grant automatic forgiveness for loans under 150,000, which was supported by, you know, the AICPA and bankers associations and groups and the bar association. I mean, pretty much everybody supported the idea of providing some automatic forgiveness for the smaller loans, and it looked like we were moving that route, and then it just never went anywhere. But while that was being even discussed or written and brought to the, you know, Congress to try to get on the agenda to be debated and voted on, that kind of led to some freezes, both of the SBA in issuing guidance and banks from wanting to process anything, because, you know, they process a lot of things that didn't ultimately need to be done if that bill was passed in July. But then it just kind of hung out there and hung out there and hung out there till finally in August through October, the guidance started rolling out again, and some banks started opening up and their forgiveness process for larger loans over 150 and saying, we're going to do those first, and if you're under that amount, we're going to roll out your, you know, portal or your ability to apply later. But there is no uniformity. You know, my recommendation, I've been saying this since day one, is to make sure you consult with your lender, whoever you got the loan from. Make sure you're aware of what they're thinking. What is their timeline? When are they going to start processing? What do they expect from you? So that you're not blindsided or don't miss any deadlines or you know, miss any emails or notifications from the bank. So that kind of goes hand in hand with that strategic patience, you know, that I was talking about, and maybe waiting a couple more weeks to get through the election and see if any of these bills are addressed in November. You know, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're familiar with what the lender is expecting of you because at the end of the day, it's the lender that, carries the stick, if you will. They're the ones that have to process the applications and make all the final calls, the final decisions on what's forgivable before the IRS, the SPA ultimately certifies that and gives it the rubber stamp. So just make sure, if you haven't seen the emails, most banks and lenders that I'm seeing are sending out regular emails that like, hey, we're gonna start processing loans under 50K in a couple weeks. So we're gonna start doing the large loans first, or whatever. Most are sending out those emails, but most of us, we get hundreds of emails a day, right? And so sometimes those sneak by, or they're not on the importance factor, and we don't maybe register what it's saying to us. But just make sure that that you're staying on top of what the lender is sending out. And if you haven't seen anything, pick up the phone, give them a call, or jump on their website and see what they're posting there, so that you're not blindsided and don't miss anything. I'm really stressing that, because that's the one, real pitfall I could see, is not meeting something or doing something the bank expected of you, and creating a potential difficulty for yourself unnecessarily. All right, so I know that was pretty quick. Went through that in about 40 minutes here, and I'm not seeing any questions. So why don't we open, I want to show you the EZ form here real quick.
Brad, I'll keep monitoring for questions. We definitely don't have any, as you see. But yeah, if you could go through those PDFs, and then if we still don't have questions when you're done with that, we'll close it up.
Okay, that sounds good.
Great, we have about 40 minutes.
Okay. All right, so this is the EZ application. And again, I'm not sure if you can see this or not, but it is under the handouts. And so if you open up the, let me see exactly what it's titled here. It says PPP Forgiveness Application 3508 EZ is the document that I have open. So if you're not able to see it on my screen share here, just open that, and you'll be looking at the same thing I'm looking at. So the first thing you'll notice here, as compared to the 3508S, is there's already more calculations here. There's a forgiveness amount calculation. It's asking for your payroll schedule. So you can see the increase in complexity from the 3508S, which basically asks demographic information and nothing else. And then some certifications you had to initial and certify were accurate. And then signature. Now in the EZ, we've moved up a bit to a few more calculations. What were your payroll costs in the covered period? And towards the top here of the form, it's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't know, 6 lines down or so, it is where you have to pick your covered period and identify your covered period. And if you're using the alternative payroll covered period, because as a reminder, that alternative date only works or is only eligible for payroll, not your non-payroll costs. So you have to identify both of those dates here. And then you go through and you identify, okay, what were my payroll costs in the applicable covered period that I'm using? What were my mortgage interest payments, my business rent or lease payments, utility payments, etc. And then you compute your potential forgiveness amounts, which, I mean, really, it almost makes it look easier than it is. When you look at this calculation, like, oh, I just put down my payroll costs and these various costs, and that's not too hard. But it gets a little difficult just because of the roping in of costs on the back end and the pulling in of costs on the front end, and what is your covered period, and documenting all those things. And it gets a little, little tricky. Then your potential forgiveness amounts, which starts on line 5 of this form, that's the total of those payroll and non-payroll costs. your PPP loan amount or your payroll cost divided by 60%, which is the how much of the loan has to be used on payroll. And it's the lesser of those three numbers. So the smallest of those is what's eligible for forgiveness. So that's the EZ form, which is still considerably easier than the full form, but more difficult than if you're under 50K, you get the nearly automatic forgiveness. Now I'm going to pop open the full loan forgiveness application, and that one, just the first word is full. It's the first handout there listed under the handouts. And this one goes through everything. This is where you get into the complexity of really needing a calculator. You have to compute your full-time equivalency, your FTEs, which, quick refresher on that, you have two options. Either you total up their actual hours per week and divide it by 40 and round it to the nearest 10th to get your full-time equivalent, which can't be greater than 1. Or for each person, they get a 1 if they average 40 hours or more a week, and they get a 0.5 if it's less. And that's the simplified way of counting your FTEs. But on this full form, now you're doing all of those calculations. You have additional schedules and tables and worksheets to do, and the form, instead of being 2 pages, is now 5 pages, and a lot more complex, and takes a lot more or higher level of expertise to complete it. So this is why, if you don't fit into the EZ form and you're not under 50,000, you can't use the easiest near automatic forgiveness form. Even though we may want to wait a bit, like I said, if you're under that 150 before we actually apply, you may want to start doing the work. You may want to start gathering the documentation, start doing some of the calculations so that you're ready when the time comes, or if that bill doesn't pass, and not scrambling. So, I keep using the made-up term that made up of strategic patience, but it doesn't mean procrastinating. It just simply means, doing the homework, doing the legwork on the back end, but waiting before we actually submit anything just a little bit longer to see if we can get around it. Now, the last point I'll make on this too is, if you're paying somebody to do this for you, if you're paying your CPA or an accountant or somebody, an advisor of some sort, to help you with this form, my opinion is, and this is, as somebody who's being paid to do these forms for a lot of clients, I'm telling my clients the same thing, just wait, don't pay me yet. Let's make sure that you have to pay me to do it. Let's make sure that there's a need to incur the expense, before, because I would feel awfully guilty, billing somebody to do this, and then, 2 weeks after we finish it, the election's over, you've paid the fee, and now it's automatically forgiven, and we just threw away, a few $100s in time, because it's not easy. It will be not super pricey, but it's not going to be cheap either if you're paying somebody to do it. So, all right, still don't see any questions. So, last chance, I guess, if there's any questions that I can answer for anybody.
No questions, Brad.
No questions. All right.
So as a reminder to everyone, we will close the presentation for today. Questions will probably arise as you actually go through this process, and when you start thinking about it a little bit more as you go through the process. So as a reminder, we have Brad on our team and several other lender experts that are working on these forgiveness applications through their banks as well. So please connect with us, because we have free assistance and support for you. You're not alone as you go through the application and the PDFs. It can get complicated as you are filling it out. So reach out to us, and the best way to do that is apply for assistance at pikespeaksbdc.org/consulting. We are non-membership based. It is completely free. All we do is gather some initial information so that we can get you on your way with consulting opportunities. So Brad, thank you so much for giving us this update today. We may have some more coming up in the future. Until then, everyone will receive a link to this presentation, so you can go back and refer to it. The PDFs will always also come your way as links. Reach out if you need any help. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.